The Final Fantasy franchise has been telling stories for nearly 40 years, and almost every single one of them ends with something completely unhinged. From time loops that erase themselves, to heroes who were never real in the first place, to gods who get punched to death by teenagers. Today I'm breaking down every ending in the mainline Final Fantasy series, starting with the one that accidentally invented paradox storytelling, Final Fantasy I. The Warriors of Light defeat Garland, the big bad, and that should be the end of it, but it's not. Garland got sent 2,000 years into the past by the Four Fiends, transformed into chaos, and created the very time loop that started the hero's quest in the first place. So the warriors travel back in time and kill chaos, breaking the loop. But here's the thing, if they kill the fiends in the past, Garland can never send them to the future, which means the loop can't exist, which means the warriors never had a reason to fight. The game just shrugs this off, and the epilogue? It tells the player directly that the warrior is you, a genuinely wild meta move for 1987. Even wilder, the game confirms that nobody in the world remembers what the warriors did. Their names are erased from history entirely. Final Fantasy II. Most people remember Final Fantasy II for its bizarre leveling system, but the ending is genuinely subversive for a game from 1988. The Emperor doesn't just die, his soul splits in half. One version rules hell as the Dark Emperor, exactly what you'd expect, but the other half ascends to heaven as the Light Emperor, claiming he's reformed and offering peace. It's a trap, he's using benevolence instead of brutality, but the goal is identical, total domination. Your dead allies, Minwu, Joseph, Ricard, appear as spirits specifically to warn the party not to fall for it. The people who literally died fighting this man come back from the grave just to say don't trust him. That's a bold twist for an early JRPG, and the ending doesn't feel like a celebration either. Victory isn't triumphant. Surviving is the win, but at least Final Fantasy II lets your party live. Final Fantasy III isn't nearly as generous with its heroes. Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy III doesn't give you a villain, it gives you entropy. The Cloud of Darkness isn't some power-hungry sorcerer with a grudge. It's pure nothingness, a force trying to erase all of creation from existence. No monologue, no master plan, just the void. But here's where the game does something genuinely brilliant with its mechanics. Before you can even damage the Cloud of Darkness, you have to free the Warriors of Darkness scattered throughout the final dungeon. Skip this step and the boss becomes nearly unkillable. The game is literally telling you through its design that balance between light and dark isn't optional. It's required for survival. Once you win, the floating continent sinks back into the ocean and the sunken world rises to the surface. A full geological reset. This is the first time Final Fantasy uses destruction as a vehicle for renewal, and it won't be the last. But if you think a force of pure nothingness is dark, wait until you see what Final Fantasy IV does with guilt. Final Fantasy IV. Here's the thing about Final Fantasy IV's ending. Most JRPGs in 1991 had you kill the bad guy and save the world. Cecil Harvey does something way more interesting. He absorbs it. At Mount Ordeals, midway through the game, Cecil encounters a mysterious dark knight who claims to be the true Cecil. Not a villain, not a monster, a manifestation of everything Cecil rejected when he became a paladin. And instead of destroying this shadow self, Cecil accepts it. He literally integrates his own darkness back into himself, becoming whole for the first time. That's not standard boss design. That's Jungian psychology disguised as a Super Nintendo game, and the payoff extends far beyond that moment. A 17-year time skip shows Cecil ruling Baron with Rosa as queen, and their son Theodore as prince. His personal redemption didn't just save him, it became the foundation of an entire kingdom. But if you think psychological depth peaked in 1991, Final Fantasy V is about to prove that sacrifice hits even harder. Final Fantasy V. Alright, buckle up, because Final Fantasy V has the longest ending sequence in the series up to this point. People have literally compared it to Return of the King. You know, the movie that ended 4 separate times and you still weren't sure it was over? That's this ending. After the party defeats Exdeath inside the Void, the world begins physically reassembling itself. Continents drift back together, the 4 crystals reform, and everything just starts healing. It's beautiful. And then the credits roll, and keep rolling. But here's where it gets interesting. If any of your party members died during the final battle and were lost in the Void, the epilogue just brings them back. Every single one. No matter what happened mechanically, the story says everyone lives. That's a quietly profound design choice. The game is telling you that true victory means nobody gets left behind, regardless of your mistakes. A 1-year time skip follows, showing each character settling into their post-adventure lives. And if you played the PlayStation version, you got full CG cinematics recreating key moments in 3D, all based on Yoshitaka Amano's original concept art. It's a layered celebration of everything you just experienced. But if you thought Final Fantasy Fantasy V's ending was sentimental, the next game throws sentimentality into a meat grinder. Final Fantasy VI. Here's where it gets weird. The entire game tells you that destroying the goddess statues will remove magic from the world. That's the deal. But after you destroy them, the game literally says magical power will not disappear. No explanation, no follow-up. It just contradicts everything you were told and moves on. But the real gut punch is Shadow. If you waited for him on the floating continent, he survives. If you didn't, his ghost appears in the ending, telling his dog, Interceptor, to leave him behind. A perfect mirror of the abandonment you chose. One of gaming's earliest moments where a single player decision carried genuine permanent narrative weight. And if you think that contradiction about magic was confusing, wait until you see what Final Fantasy VII does with its entire planet. Final Fantasy VII. Destroying Sephiroth's body isn't enough. Cloud has to enter the lifestream itself for one final metaphysical confrontation, because the real battle was never physical, it was spiritual. And even after that, the planet still isn't safe. Holy, the ultimate white magic that Aerith literally died to activate proves too weak to stop Meteor on its own. The lifestream itself has to intervene, rising up to push Meteor back in a last desperate act of planetary self-defense. But here's where it gets complicated. The game never confirms whether it actually worked. The final shot shows children laughing, light filling the screen, and then Midgar, completely deserted, overgrown with plants, no people anywhere. That either means humanity successfully evacuated and nature reclaimed the city, or humanity simply doesn't exist anymore. And the game never tells you which one it is. That ambiguity is one of gaming's most famous unanswered questions, and it's entirely intentional. What makes it hit even harder is Aerith. Her death earlier in the game isn't really an ending, it's a transformation. She continues to act through the lifestream, guiding Holy, redirecting the planet's energy. She has more agency dead than most characters have alive. The game reframes loss itself as something other than defeat. But if you think that ending left people arguing, wait until you see what Final Fantasy VIII did to people's brains. Final Fantasy VIII. Here's where the series completely lost its mind with time travel. Ultimecia is a sorceress from the distant future who wants to compress all of time into a single moment where only she exists. Every timeline, every era, every person crushed into one point of consciousness. The party stops her by traveling through that compressed space and killing her inside it. But here's the thing, the game never tells you whether this actually changes the future. Ultimecia's defeat transfers her powers back to Edea in the past, which means the cycle that created Ultimecia in the first place just continues. She rises, she compresses time, she gets defeated, her powers go back. It's a loop with zero confirmed exit, and then there's the campfire scene. After the credits, Squall opens up emotionally to his friends in this quiet, beautiful moment. Except his ring is missing, the environment is vague, nothing confirms where or when this is happening. Communities have debated for over 2 decades whether the main party actually survived, or whether that scene is an afterlife dressed up as a happy ending. Nobody knows. The game wants it that way, but at least Final Fantasy VIII gives you something to argue about. Final Fantasy IX gives you something to cry about. Final Fantasy IX. Kuja is one of the most tragic villains in the series, because his entire motivation boils down to one thing. He found out he's going to die. That's it. He learns he has a limited lifespan, and instead of accepting it, he decides that if he can't live forever, nobody gets to live at all. He tries to destroy the entire universe out of pure existential rage. But here's where it gets weird. The party stops Kuja, pushes through to the very edge of the void, and then a completely different final boss just shows up. Necron, an embodiment of death itself that has zero connection to Kuja. He literally declares, I am eternal as long as there is life and death. The party beats him through sheer willpower, but Necron doesn't actually die. He retreats. Because you can't kill death. You can only choose to keep living despite it. And that's exactly what the ending is about. The epilogue shows young black mages walking through the streets of Alexandria. Vivi himself is gone, but his people, his culture, his identity, they persist through new generations. The victory isn't individual, it's civilizational. Vivi's legacy lives on not because he survived, but because what he represented was worth continuing. But if you think that's a bittersweet ending, the next game takes bittersweet and absolutely destroys you with it. Final Fantasy X. Tidus was never real. That's not a twist you discover in the final hour. The game tells you, slowly, painfully, across dozens of hours, and you just don't want to believe it. Tidus is a dream summoned by the Faith, spirits of humans who sacrifice themselves to keep dreams in Arcand alive as a 1,000-year-old collective cognitive hallucination. The protagonist of this entire adventure is, ontologically, a figment of spiritual imagination, and here's where it gets complicated. Destroying Sin erases the very conditions that kept the dream alive, so Titus fades. He walks through his friends, unable to touch them, and disappears alongside Aura, Braska, and Yecht, all spiritual entities whose time has finally run out. But his feelings were real, his relationships were real. Every laugh, every argument, every quiet moment with Yuna, all of it happened regardless of what he was made of. The game is deliberately asking you a question it refuses to answer. Does something that only existed as a dream matter less? In the post-game cinematics of 10-2, Titus wakes up underwater, smiling, implying the faith gathered his essence and brought him back. Whether that's resurrection, a new summoning, or pure wish fulfillment, the game leaves completely open. And honestly, that ambiguity is the point. But if you thought dream logic was confusing, wait until Final Fantasy XI tries to make you a literal god. Final Fantasy XI. Here's the thing about ending an MMO. You can't. The world is still running. Players are still logging in. So how do you write a finale for a game that never actually stops? Final Fantasy XI tried, and the answer they came up with is genuinely one of the strangest in the entire series. The Rhapsodies of Vana'diel questline reveals that the mysterious figure who's been trying to stop you throughout the story is you, your own character from the future. And the reason future you is trying to prevent present you from continuing, because you succeed too well. Your character achieves literal godhood through the accumulated power of every adventure, every battle, every victory across years of play. But that ascension comes with a cost. All the darkness built up from years of dying and resurrecting in Vana'diel splits off as its own conscious entity. Your shadow stays behind, attacking the players still in the world. The ending itself closes on still images of memories and beloved characters, then does something no other Final Fantasy had done before. It directly thanks the players, not the characters, the players, because structurally this isn't really an ending. It's a chapter transition dressed as a conclusion. The servers kept running, the world kept existing, and that dark entity born from your godhood, still out there. It's the only Final Fantasy ending that has to acknowledge a philosophical truth the others never face. Some stories don't get to end, they just get to pause. But if you think an MMO struggling to find its ending is complicated, wait until you see what happens when Final Fantasy goes full political thriller. Final Fantasy XII. Here's the thing about Final Fantasy XII's ending. It's not really about the heroes. The pivotal turning point against Vayne isn't some grand party attack. It's Gabranth, Bash's own twin brother, a Judge Magister who served Vayne loyally, turning his blade against the man he once obeyed without question. Someone shaped entirely by the Empire's influence who ultimately rejected everything Vayne stood for. And that's not an accident. That's structurally brilliant storytelling. Vayne's arc is a masterclass in power, destroying everything it touches. He killed his own father. He dissolved the entire Arcadian Senate. And when Gabranth's strike failed to stop him, Vayne fused with the god Venat to become the Undying, gaining literal divine power. But it didn't save him. Your party still cuts him down. The more power he consumed, the faster he fell apart. But here's where it gets interesting. The ending restores Dalmasca's sovereignty, gives Ashe her throne back, and then just stops. No political rebuilding montage, no healed wounds, no triumphant reconstruction. Because the game understood something most stories don't. Ending a war is the easy part. Rebuilding after one, that's the real fight, and it's too messy and unglamorous to wrap up in a cutscene. Final Fantasy XIII. Here's where the series pulls one of its nastiest tricks. You beat the final boss, Orphan, the fal'Cie keeping Cocoon alive and floating in the sky. Victory, right? No. Killing Orphan immediately causes Cocoon to start plummeting toward Pulse. You win the fight and create an extinction-level disaster in the same breath. Fang and Vanille respond by doing the only thing they can. They transform into the complete form of Ragnarok and crystallize themselves into a massive pillar, catching Cocoon mid-fall and holding it in place. But the crystallization doesn't stop with them. It spreads to the entire party, locking everyone in stasis alongside the very thing they just saved. Salvation and imprisonment, same package. When the crystal eventually breaks, most of the party wakes up normal. Saj, Snow, Hope, Lightning, they're fine. But Fang and Vanille remain frozen together permanently. Their sacrifice the one cost the universe refuses to refund. Lightning closes things out with a speech, reframing everything the party went through. Freedom isn't escaping your fate, it's choosing how you walk through it. You can't control what destiny hands you, but you absolutely control how you carry it. For a game about characters literally branded with a purpose they didn't ask for, that's a powerful note to land on. But if you think crystallized sacrifice is dramatic, wait until you see what Final Fantasy XIV does with an entire world-ending apocalypse before the game even properly starts. Final Fantasy XIV. You'd think killing Gaius Van Baelzer and destroying the Ultima weapon would be enough, and the game lets you believe that for about 30 seconds. Then La Habrea shows up. This Ascian, who's been pulling strings behind every major conflict in the story, unleashes a spell that rivals Meteor in sheer destructive power. The game essentially fakes you out with a final boss, then immediately throws a second climax at you. You only survive because the Mother Crystal channels crystalline light directly through your character, giving you just enough power to put La Habrea down. But here's the thing, the victory is explicitly incomplete, and the game knows it. The Ascians are still active. The cosmic war they represent has barely been scratched. The game declares a new astral age has begun, but everyone involved understands the real fight is just getting started. Minfilia even formally transfers narrative authority to your character, naming you the true leader of this new era. Now, like FF11, this is an MMO that structurally cannot end, but unlike FF11, FF14 makes that incompleteness thematically intentional. The ending isn't a conclusion, it's a launch ramp. Every expansion that follows, from Heavensward to Endwalker, builds directly on this moment. The story doesn't fail to end. It refuses to, but if you think an ending designed to never truly finish is strange, wait until you see what FF15 does with an ending that was always meant to be final. Final Fantasy XV. Noctis spends the entire game learning one thing. Being the chosen king means dying. The Ring of Lucy drains the bearer's lifespan, and using its full power to destroy the Starscourge requires everything he has left. There's no loophole, no secret third option, just death. But here's the thing, his sacrifice doesn't feel unique because everyone around him has already paid the same price. Lunafreya dies before the story even hits its midpoint. King Regis dies to ensure Noctis escapes safely, and Ignis, Gladiolus, and Prompto hold the line at Insomnia while Noctis walks in alone. He's not the first to give everything, he's the last. That's the emotional engine of this ending. Noctis isn't a lone martyr. He's simply continuing a chain of sacrifice that started long before him. And then there's the campfire scene. Noctis sits with his companions one final time, says goodbye, and it absolutely destroys you, but nobody can agree on when it happens. Is it moments before his death, or is it an afterlife reunion? The ring is gone from his hand, and Ignis describes their time apart as lasting an eternity, which works for both readings. Final Fantasy loves doing this, leaving you with a moment that feels emotionally complete but narratively unresolved, so the ending lives in your head forever. The franchise doesn't give you closure, it gives you something to argue about for decades. But if you think a sacrificial king is heavy, wait until you see what Final Fantasy XVI asks its hero to destroy. Final Fantasy XVI. Here's where the entire franchise eats itself. Clive Rosfield spends all of Final Fantasy XVI hunting the person who killed his brother Joshua. He tears through Valisthea, absorbs the power of every dominant he encounters, and wages war against a god named Ultima, who has been pulling strings since before human civilization existed. But the final revelation isn't some hidden villain. The person who killed Joshua was Clive himself. A moment of childhood violence he buried so deep that his entire quest for vengeance was aimed at a ghost of his own making, and Ultima engineered every piece of it. The god designed events to maximize Clive's guilt, despair, and rage, because those emotions were the fuel Ultima needed to destroy worlds and build new ones. Clive was never the hero, he was the battery. But here's the kicker. Clive absorbs the combined power of every dominant, transcends his intended purpose, and defeats Ultima. The creation surpasses the creator, but defeating a god isn't enough. As long as the Mother Crystal exists, magic continues enabling the same cycles of domination that destroyed everything Clive loved. So he destroys the final crystal. He erases magic entirely from Valisthea. The cost is his own life. Think about that. A Final Fantasy game ends by destroying magic, the one concept that defines the entire franchise, the thing in the literal title, and Final Fantasy XVI concludes that it was the problem all along, not the solution. The chain. That's not just an ending, that's a statement. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.